Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The wind beyond the wall carried a voice older than men, a low, sighing murmur that moved through the black pines and over the endless drifts of snow. It was the voice of the true North, a sound that few ever heard and fewer still understood. To most, it was only the wind, but to Jon Snow, standing atop the frozen rise with Ghost at his side, it sounded like a warning. The night stretched wide and white before him. Behind lay the wall, a glimmering ghostly shadow beneath the moonlight, and beyond, only the wilderness of ice and stone and silence. 1,000 miles of cold secrets waited out there. Jon had known them once, when he rode with Corin Halfhand and the wildling woman who had changed him more than he dared admit. But tonight was different. Tonight, he led men of the Watch. He was Lord Commander now. "Firelight," muttered Dolorous Ed beside him, pointing toward the distant ridge. A faint orange gleam flickered there, like the dying breath of a candle. Wildlings, or something worse. Jon's hand rested on Longclaw's pommel. The Valyrian steel felt cold even through his glove. "We'll know soon enough," he said. "Form the line. No man strays alone." The Rangers obeyed without a word. 7 of them in all, Ed, Soren Pike, old Maller the Huntmaster, and 4 younger men whose eyes showed both fear and pride. They moved in single file through the drifts, their cloaks dragging shadows behind them. The snow whispered beneath their boots. The wind pressed against their faces, biting through the wool and fur. It was the first mission Jon had commanded beyond the wall since Hardhome. He had seen death there, seen the dead rise with blue eyes and empty hearts. He had felt the hopeless terror that came with facing something that could not die. He told himself this was only a patrol, a simple scouting run to find the source of strange fires seen from the top of the wall. Yet a part of him, quiet but certain, knew that something far darker awaited. The fire grew nearer, the air smelled faintly of ash. When they reached the ridge, the men halted. Before them lay a small hollow, shielded by a ring of half-buried stones. Within, a fire had once burned strong, but now it was nothing but smoking embers. Scattered about were the remains of a wildling camp, tents torn apart, furs frozen stiff with blood. "7 save us," whispered Maller, kneeling beside a corpse. The man's eyes were open, his throat torn out. His face was twisted, not in pain, but in astonishment. "Not whites," Jon said softly. "The dead don't bleed like this." "No, but something killed them," said Ed, glancing into the trees, "and I don't think it's still sleeping." Jon crouched beside one of the bodies, tracing the wounds. The cuts were deep and clean, too sharp for claws, too jagged for steel. Some of the corpses were half frozen into the snow, as though they'd been left there for days. Yet the fire was still warm. "They were killed recently," Jon said. "Maybe by their own, maybe not." The youngest ranger, Wint, swallowed hard. "Do we burn them, my lord?" Jon hesitated. Every instinct told him to say yes. Burn them before night fell. Burn them all. But the sun had already gone down, and the woods were thick with shadows. "No," he said at last. "We'll move on. We can't stay here." They left the hollow behind and pressed deeper into the forest. The pines grew dense and dark, their branches heavy with snow. The wind howled like a living thing. John felt Ghost's fur bristle against his leg. The direwolf's red eyes gleamed in the half-light, alert and uneasy. "Something's following us," John said quietly. Ed nodded grimly. "Aye. I've been hearing it since the ridge. Steps, soft but steady. Not beast, not man." They turned suddenly as a shape passed between the trees, a shadow upon a shadow. The rangers drew their blades. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, from the dark, came a whispering rustle, and the snow behind them stirred. "Hold fast," John commanded. A figure stumbled into their torchlight. It was a wildling man, pale and trembling, his furs in tatters. His eyes were wide and hollow. "They're coming," he gasped, falling to his knees. "The cold ones, they're walking again." Before John could answer, the man sagged forward. A spear wound gaped in his back. The snow beneath him steamed where his blood touched it. John raised his gaze toward the trees. There was no sound, no movement, only that endless whispering wind. "Back to the ridge," he ordered. "Now." They moved fast, the night closing in around them. Behind, faintly, came the sound of cracking ice and the crunch of slow, deliberate footsteps. The cold grew sharper, more bitter, as if the very air had died. Ed's torch sputtered, its flame turning blue at the edges. Ghost growled low in his throat. John turned once, and in that single moment he saw them. Shapes moving between the trees, thin, tall, and gleaming like frost beneath the moon. Their eyes burned with pale fire. "Run!" John shouted. They fled through the snow, stumbling, gasping, the torches dimming one by one. Behind them, the dead followed, silent, relentless, tireless. And thus began Jon Snow's first night beyond the wall as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. The night the dead walked again. The wind did not cease when they fled. It grew crueler, shrieking through the pines as though it mocked them. The snow deepened, swallowing their tracks as fast as they made them. Jon led from the front, Ghost gliding beside him like a white wraith. Behind came Dolorous Ed and the others, dark shapes moving through whirling drifts. "Keep together," Jon called above the storm. "No one falls behind." They reached a ravine where the ground broke open in a tangle of frozen roots and half-buried stones. Beyond it, a narrow trail wound upward toward the western heights. Jon remembered the maps, old sketches of this land, drawn before the long night itself. If they could reach the ridge, they might find the ruins of an old watchtower where men of the first men once stood guard. Shelter, fire, hope. But the forest had other plans. A scream tore through the blizzard. The young ranger, Wint, spun around, his torch flaring wildly. "Malor!" he shouted. Jon turned in time to see the older man vanish into the snow, dragged backward by something pale and swift. The light from his torch vanished with him. "Form the line," Jon ordered, drawing Longclaw. Its Valyrian steel gleamed with faint ripples of silver light. The others gathered close, blades out, backs to one another. Nothing moved for a heartbeat, only the sound of the wind and their own ragged breathing. Then came a low crackle, like ice breaking on a lake, and a figure emerged from the storm. Malor stood before them, or what had once been Malor. His eyes burned blue, his flesh pale as the moon. He moved stiffly, sword dragging behind him, frost clinging to his beard. "Seven save us," muttered Ed. Jon stepped forward, firelight glinting off his blade. "Forgive me, brother," he said softly, and struck. Longclaw bit deep, shattering bone and frozen sinew. Malor fell without a sound. The others turned their faces away, but Jon did not. He knew this would not be the last. "Keep moving," he said. "The dead are close, and there are more than one." They pressed onward through the ravine, climbing the narrow trail toward the ridge. The snow thickened until the world itself seemed nothing but white mist and shadow. Twice, they stumbled upon bodies buried in the drifts, wildlings, their faces frozen in terror. Once they found a burned-out cart and the remains of a horse, torn apart as though by claws. At last, through the whirling snow, they saw it, the faint outline of stone rising from the hilltop, a ruin, half-fallen walls, a broken gate, and the black mouth of a tower leaning against the stars. They reached it at dusk. The wind screamed across the ridge, but within the shattered walls, the air was still. The place smelled of dust and ancient frost. "It was a fort once," said Ed, glancing around. "From the first men, I'd wager. Look at those carvings." Indeed, along the inner wall, beneath a crust of ice, were faint etchings, runes and spiral marks that seemed to twist when the torchlight touched them. John brushed one with his glove, and the stone felt strangely warm. "This place remembers fire," he murmured. "They built what camp they could." A small fire sputtered in the corner of the ruin, its flame reflecting in Ghost's crimson eyes. The men sat close, silent, but for the crackle of burning wood. Each face was drawn tight with fear and exhaustion. Wint, the youngest, stared into the fire. "Why do they come now?" he asked. "I thought the wall kept them back." "The wall holds men," said John. "The dead care nothing for stone or spells. The cold follows its own path." Ed poked at the fire with his knife. "Aye, and it's found ours." John said nothing. He listened instead, to the wind, to the faint sigh of snow against the stones. The night beyond the walls felt watchful, as though something waited just beyond the reach of the firelight. When the others slept, John remained awake. Ghost lay beside him, growling softly in his dreams. John stared into the flame, remembering the wildling's dying words. "The cold ones are walking again." He thought of the wall, of Sam, Jilly, and little Sam, of the brothers who trusted him to lead. He thought of the great, empty north and the powers that stirred beneath its ice. A sound came then, soft, deliberate. Footsteps on snow. John rose at once, longclaw in hand. "Ed," he hissed. The man stirred, groggy, and reached for his sword. The steps stopped. Silence fell heavy as a shroud. Then, from the blackness beyond the gate, came a pale shimmer. A figure moved there, tall, thin, cloaked in frost. Its armor gleamed like crystal. Its eyes burned blue. In its hand was a blade that seemed carved from pure ice. A white walker. The fire dimmed, its flame shrinking as though afraid. The men froze. The creature stepped closer, its feet soundless on the snow. "Run," whispered Wint, but John did not move. "Stay by the fire," John said quietly. "Fire and dragon glass, those are our weapons." He took one step forward. The walker watched him, head tilted slightly, like a man studying an insect. The cold that rolled from it was not natural. It bit into flesh and soul alike. John lifted Longclaw. "You'll not have us." The creature moved then, swift as a shadow. Its sword swept down and steel met ice. The clash rang like thunder. Frost bloomed along Longclaw's edge, but the Valyrian steel held true. John struck again, driving the creature back toward the broken archway. "Now!" he shouted. Ed hurled a torch. The flames struck the walker's cloak, and for a heartbeat it burned bright as dawn. The creature shrieked, a sound like the cracking of glaciers, and dissolved into mist. The icy sword fell and shattered upon the ground. The men stood panting in the ruined silence. The night outside seemed to breathe again, softer, less cruel. "Is it dead?" asked Wint. John shook his head. "They don't die easy, and where one walks, more will follow." He turned his eyes toward the forest below. Far off, deep in the valley, lights flickered, cold and white, moving slowly through the snow. "They're coming," he said. And above them, unseen, the moon hid its face behind the clouds. That night, the fire burned low, and none of the brothers of the night's watch dared to sleep. Jon sat with Ghost beside him, watching the horizon, and knew that before dawn came, they would face death again. For the wall's shadow stretched long and far, and the dead were rising to meet it. The night seemed endless. Cold stars shivered above the ruin, faint and distant, as though frightened by the darkness gathering below. Jon sat with his back to the broken wall, his sword resting across his knees. The fire had burned low, little more than embers now, but no one dared to feed it. The smoke might betray them. Yet without it, the chill would seep into their bones, and the fear with it. Dolorous Ed kept watch beside the gate, his face drawn and pale beneath his hood. Wint slept fitfully, his sword still clutched in his hand. The others dozed in turns, though none truly rested. Every now and then, the wind carried faint sounds from beyond the ridge, distant cracking, soft thuds, the creak of ice beneath heavy feet. Jon's thoughts wandered back to Castle Black, to the wall itself, standing tall and silent under the moon. He could almost feel the weight of it, a living thing that had watched the world change 1,000 times. What would the wall say, he wondered, if it could speak? Would it tell us we are fools for venturing beyond it, or mourn that it can no longer hold the night at bay? Ghost stirred beside him, ears pricking. A low growl rumbled in the direwolf's throat. Jon was on his feet in an instant. "What is it?" Ed whispered. Jon held up a hand for silence. The sound came again. A soft scraping from the far side of the ruin. Something moved in the snow. He signaled Ed to wake the others, then crept toward the sound. The moon slid from behind a cloud, silver light spilling over the stones. Jon's breath froze in the air as he peered through a gap in the wall. At first he saw nothing. Then, from the shadow of a half-buried tree, a figure rose slowly, human-shaped, but too still, too silent. Its eyes glimmered faintly blue. Jon stepped back. "They found us," he murmured. The next instant, the wall shuddered as the creature hurled itself against the stones. The others awoke to chaos. "Two arms!" Ed cried. "They're upon us!" 3 of them came first, dead wildlings, their skin cracked with frost, their fingers black and hard as iron. They clambered over the walls like beasts, moving with terrible purpose. Wint struck one down with his blade, but it rose again, its mouth opening in a hiss of cold air. "Dragonglass!" Jon shouted. "Use the daggers!" They fought in the flickering half-light, steel flashing, torches burning low. Jon drove Longclaw through the chest of one wight, then kicked it into the fire where it writhed and burned, the stench of it foul beyond words. Ed was knocked to the ground, a corpse clawing at his throat. Jon swung hard, the Valyrian steel slicing clean through bone and spine. The thing collapsed, twitching once before lying still. When at last the ruin fell quiet, 5 bodies lay scattered about the fire. Only 3 of the watch still stood, Jon, Ed, and Wint. The rest had fallen, their faces already turning pale with the cold. Wint trembled, wiping blood and ice from his cheek. "We can't fight them all, my lord. We'll die here." Jon looked out through the shattered gate. Down in the valley, he could see more shadows moving, too many to count. The pale torches of the dead gleamed like fallen stars. "No," Jon said. "We'll not die here. There's an old pass that leads south of this ridge, toward the Frostfang trails. We reach it by dawn, or not at all." Ed nodded grimly. And the brothers? Jon's throat tightened. The fallen men were already stirring, their hands twitching, their eyes flickering faint blue. There was no time for burial. "We give them mercy," Jon said. Together they burned their dead one by one beneath the open sky. The flames leapt high, defiant against the wind. Ghost howled, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the forest, answered by no living thing. When it was done, they gathered what little remained: torches, dragon glass daggers, and a single flask of oil, and began their descent from the ridge. The snow had eased, but the cold deepened, thick as glass. Every step was a struggle, their boots sinking into the drifts. The silence pressed close, broken only by the crunch of snow and the whisper of Ghost's paws. Hours passed. The moon dipped lower, and with it their strength. Wint stumbled, falling to one knee. Jon turned to help him, but the young ranger pushed his hand away. "Go," he gasped. "Leave me. I can't." A shadow fell across the snow. "Run!" Jon shouted. From the dark came a storm of frost. The first of the White Walkers appeared at the edge of the trail, tall and terrible, its armor shining with a light of its own. Another followed, then another. The air itself seemed to freeze, the breath in Jon's lungs turning to ice. Ed threw the flask of oil, torch in hand. Flames burst across the path, a wall of fire roaring between them and the advancing dead. For a heartbeat, the light drove them back. "Move!" Jon yelled. "Down the slope!" They ran, stumbling through the smoke and sparks, snow hissing where the fire met it. The ground dropped suddenly into a hollow, and they tumbled into the drift below. Above, the walkers watched from beyond the flames, unmoving, their eyes like shards of frozen dawn. When at last the fire guttered out, the night closed around them once more. They reached the hollow's far side and found the faint shape of a doorway carved into the rock. A tunnel, ancient and half-hidden. Strange runes marked the lintel, glowing faintly in the dark. "What is this place?" Wint whispered. "A refuge," Jon said, though he did not know for whom. Inside, the air was still and heavy. The walls were carved with spirals and lines that seemed to twist when touched by light. Old bones lay scattered along the floor, wrapped in shreds of leather and bronze. In the farthest chamber, they found what looked to be an altar of stone. Upon it rested a small bundle wrapped in fur. Jon unwrapped it carefully, revealing shards of obsidian, dragon glass, bound with copper wire. Beneath it lay a symbol of the first men, worn smooth with age. Jon's heart quickened. This was their hall, he murmured. The first men who fought the others before the wall was raised. Ed exhaled slowly. Then we're standing on ground that once held them back. Maybe it still can, Jon said. He gathered the dragon glass and placed it in his satchel. We hold here till dawn. Then we make for the wall. Outside, the wind howled once more, and faintly, so faintly, it seemed to carry the echo of distant voices. They were not the voices of the living. The night was far from done with them. The hollow beneath the mountain breathed like a living thing. The air was thick with the scent of cold stone and age-old dust. Somewhere in the dark, water dripped in slow, steady rhythm, each drop echoing down endless tunnels. The fire Jon lit cast wavering shadows upon the walls, where carvings of ancient battles seemed to stir as the flames danced. 3 men remained: Jon, Dolorous Ed, and Wint, pale and trembling from the march. Ghost prowled near the entrance, ears twitching at every sound. The direwolf's breath came in soft clouds that shimmered like mist. Jon crouched beside the fire, warming his hands though he felt little warmth. The cold had crept into his bones, deeper than flesh. "We rest here," he said. "At dawn, we move." Ed gave a weary nod, though his eyes remained fixed on the mouth of the cave. "I've seen quieter nights in the graveyard," he muttered, "and friendlier company." "Better the stones than the dead," John said. He turned his gaze upon the walls. The carvings told a story, the tale of men standing against pale shadows, of fire and steel meeting ice. One figure, larger than the rest, held aloft a sword that burned like the sun. Around him were spirals of flame, and beneath his feet, the frozen forms of the slain. John reached out, tracing the figure's outline. Whoever they were, they fought as we must fight now. Wind stirred from where he sat, wrapped in his cloak. "And did they win, my lord?" John's hand fell to his side. "For a time." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind screamed through the cracks of the mountain, carrying with it faint whispers that set their hearts to unease. Ghost growled once, low and warning. John stood. "They're near." Ed rose with him, gripping his sword. "How many?" "Too many." From beyond the tunnel, pale light flickered, blue and cold. The sound of crunching snow echoed closer. John's heart quickened. "They've tracked us," he said. "There's no escape by the way we came." "Then where?" asked Wint, his voice cracking. John looked deeper into the tunnel. The carvings there changed, no longer of men and battle, but of a gate, and beyond it a blazing fire that reached the heavens. A memory stirred within him. Maester Aemon's words long ago, spoken on a cold night at Castle Black. Even in darkness, the fire remembers its own. "There's another way," John said. "These tunnels run deep. The first men must have carved them for a reason." They gathered what they could, dousing the fire with a handful of snow. The light vanished, leaving only the ghostly gleam of their torches. Ghost led the way, silent and sure-footed, as they descended further into the mountain's heart. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder still. Frost rimed the walls, their breath froze before them. After a time, they came upon a chamber wider than any before. Its ceiling vanished into shadow. In its center stood a stone dais, and upon it a circle of runes carved deep into the floor. John stepped closer, studying the marks. "Old tongue," he murmured. "Older than the first men." Ed frowned. "And what good's that to us now?" Before John could answer, a chill swept the chamber. The torches flickered, then burned blue. The cold grew so sharp it felt like knives against their skin. "They've found us," John said. From the tunnel behind came the sound of breaking ice, the scrape of bone on stone. Wights, dozens of them, crawling through the dark. John drew Longclaw, its edge shining silver in the ghostly light. "Circle the dais," he ordered. "Hold them there." They stood shoulder to shoulder as the dead poured into the chamber. The wights came fast, their eyes burning, their mouths open in silent hunger. Longclaw sang through the air, cleaving through flesh and frozen sinew. Ed struck low, dragging one corpse into the runes. Wint stabbed wildly, his blade shaking but true. Ghost leapt among them, white fur streaked with crimson, tearing and snarling. Still they came. For every one that fell, two rose in its place. The circle of light shrank. Wint stumbled, his torch extinguished. "My lord!" he cried, and vanished beneath a heap of corpses. John reached for him. Too late. "Ed!" he shouted. "I see it!" Ed swung hard, his sword biting through a wight's neck. "We can't hold, John." John looked to the runes beneath his feet. The carvings glowed faintly where the blood had fallen, lines of fire running like veins through the stone. A warmth rose from below, strange, ancient, alive, "Back," Jon cried. "Off the circle." Ed obeyed without question, dragging Ghost with him. Jon remained at the edge of the runes, his breath coming fast. He drove Longclaw into the center of the carvings. For an instant, the world went still. Then light erupted. Flame burst from the runes, golden and fierce. It roared up like a living wall, consuming the wights nearest to it. The chamber filled with fire and shadow, the screams of the dead echoing off the stone. Jon staggered back, shielding his face. When the light faded, silence returned. The floor was blackened, the air thick with smoke. The dead lay still, their eyes dimmed. Ed coughed, wiping soot from his beard. 7 hells, he said. "What did you do?" Jon looked at the scorched circle. The runes still glowed faintly, like embers that refused to die. "I think the fire remembers," he said softly. "The first men left it here, waiting for the day it would be needed again." He turned to where Wint had fallen, but the boy was gone. Nothing left but a charred sword hilt. Jon bowed his head. He fought bravely. Ed placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all did, but we're not done yet." "No," Jon said, rising. "The dawn is still far away." They climbed from the chamber, following a narrow tunnel that led upward through the rock. The air grew warmer as they went, carrying a faint scent of pine and open wind. At last, they emerged upon a ledge overlooking the forest. The first hint of gray touched the horizon. Below, the valley lay still. No movement stirred among the trees. Yet in the distance, beyond the frozen river, Jon saw a figure watching, a tall, pale shape with eyes like winter stars. The White Walker stood motionless, a silent sentinel amid the snow. It made no move to follow, no sound of challenge, only lifted one hand, slow and deliberate. A promise. Jon felt the weight of that gesture deep within him. The war was not over. It had only begun. He turned to Ed. "We ride for the wall." Ed gave a grim smile. "Aye, Lord Commander, and may the wall still stand when we reach it." Together, they began their long descent into the waking world, leaving behind the hollow and its sleeping fire. The wind followed them, whispering through the trees, a voice as old as the world, calling their names into the dawn. And far to the north, beyond sight and reason, something cold stirred once more. The dawn came thin and colorless, spilling like pale milk across the snow. The light did not warm. It only revealed the desolation left behind. The forest lay silent, each tree a frozen sentinel, the earth itself stiff beneath the frost. Jon Snow and Dolorous Ed moved cautiously through the drifts, the direwolf ghost gliding before them like a pale spirit. Their breath steamed in the still air. Neither spoke for a long while. The events of the night clung to them as the frost clings to steel, cold, heavy, and unyielding. At last, Ed broke the silence. "I can't say I've had worse nights," he muttered, "though I can't rightly think of one either." Jon managed a faint smile. "We're alive. That's more than I dared hope." "Aye, alive," said Ed, trudging through the snow. "But for how long, I can't say. The wall feels a long way off, and I don't much fancy dying out here where no one will remember my name." "They'll remember," Jon said quietly. "The Watch remembers." Ed gave a low grunt that might have been laughter. "The Watch forgets everything but the cold." Jon said no more. His eyes were fixed upon the horizon, where a faint ridge of ice-marked hills rose against the light. Somewhere beyond lay the road back to Castle Black. It would take 2 days at least, maybe 3, if the snow deepened. Ghost halted suddenly, muzzle raised to the wind. The direwolf's fur bristled. Jon followed his gaze. Across the clearing ahead, a trail of smoke wound thinly into the sky. "A camp," he said. or what's left of one. They moved carefully toward it, every step measured. The smoke came from a smoldering fire pit surrounded by shattered wood and torn hides. A few bones jutted from the ashes, blackened and cracked by heat. The snow around it was trampled and stained. Wildlings, John thought. What few had survived beyond the wall were scattered, hunted, and desperate. But this camp had not fallen to hunger or cold. The prints in the snow, deep and heavy, too many to count, told a darker tale. Ed crouched near the fire. "They burned them," he said. "Every one of them." John studied the prints. "No," he said slowly. "They didn't burn their own. They burned what they became." Ed shuddered. "Seven, save us." The sound of wings startled them both. A raven rose from the trees, black feathers bright against the snow. It circled once, croaking, then veered northward. John's heart quickened. "A message bird," he said. "It might have come from one of the ranging posts." Ed shaded his eyes. "If there's anyone left to send them." John watched the bird until it vanished. "We follow it," he decided. "If there are brothers alive out here, we must find them." The day wore on as they traveled north through the ruins of the forest. Trees lay broken by age and storm. Others bore strange marks upon their trunks, deep spirals cut with a careful hand. The farther they went, the older the forest seemed, until even the snow felt untouched by time. By midday, clouds gathered again, and the wind began to howl. Snow swirled down in thick, blinding flurries. "We need shelter," John said. They found it at last in the hollow of an ancient tree, a giant pine whose trunk had split wide with age. The hollow within was deep enough to crawl into and dry despite the storm. They lit a small fire with what tinder they had left. Ed leaned close to the flames, rubbing his hands. "I swear this North wants us dead." "It wants everything dead," John said. They sat in silence for a time, listening to the wind outside. Ghost lay at the mouth of the hollow, watching the forest with unblinking red eyes. When Ed spoke again, his voice was low. "You saw it too, didn't you? The one that raised its hand? That walker?" John nodded. "Aye. It wanted me to see." "Why?" John's hand tightened around Longclaw's hilt. "Because it knows the wall won't hold forever. It's showing me what comes next." Ed looked at him, eyes hollow in the firelight. "Then Seven help us all." As night fell, they took turns keeping watch. The snow outside buried their footprints, erasing every sign of their passing. The world felt smaller now, hemmed in by darkness and storm. John could not sleep. His mind returned again and again to the fire beneath the mountain, the runes, the sudden light, the warmth that had answered his call. He had felt something there, something ancient. The fire had known him somehow. The fire remembers its own. He thought of his father, of Winterfell, of all that had been lost. He thought of Melisandre's strange words, of kings of ice and kings of fire, and felt a stirring deep within him that he could neither name nor welcome. Ghost stirred and growled softly. John tensed. "What is it?" The direwolf padded outside into the snow. John followed, blade in hand. The storm had eased. A faint silver glow shone through the clouds, painting the forest in ghostly light. And there, between the trees, he saw it, a figure moving slowly toward him. It was a man, or had been once. His armor was blackened steel, his cloak torn and rimed with frost. When the light touched his face, John felt his heart stop. "By the gods," he whispered. It was one of his own. The ranger's face was pale, his eyes glazed blue. He moved stiffly, dragging a broken sword in one hand. Snow crusted his beard and armor, but there was no mistaking him. "Sir Kedge," John breathed. He was with the Eastwatch garrison. The man's mouth opened, releasing a sound that was not a breath, but a sigh of wind through a grave. He lurched forward. Jon swung Longclaw. The blade struck true, splitting flesh and bone, and the ranger fell without a cry. Ed appeared behind him, torch in hand. More of them? Jon looked around. The forest stood silent once more. No, he said. Not yet. They dragged the body into the clearing and burned it there. The fire hissed, the snow melting around it in a black circle. When it was done, Jon stared into the ashes. There's no corner of this world they haven't touched, he said softly. Ed crossed himself. Then what chance do we have? Jon looked east, toward the unseen wall. The same chance men have always had, to fight until we can fight no more. The storm broke again before dawn, fierce and wild. Yet in the brief calm between the winds, Jon thought he heard a sound far away, a horn, low and mournful, blowing from the direction of the wall. He turned sharply, listening. Once, twice, then silence. Ed frowned. Was that? The watch, Jon said. They're calling. He felt his heart steady. The fire of purpose burned in his chest once more. Gather what we can, he said. We march at first light. And as the night yielded slowly to the gray of morning, Jon Snow swore to himself that he would see the wall again or die before the dead claimed it. Above, unseen through the snow, the ravens were already flying south. The horn had sounded only twice, yet the echoes haunted the dawn like a memory that would not fade. Each note seemed to roll through the air, heavy and mournful, carrying with it both promise and dread. Jon Snow listened until it faded entirely, leaving only the sighing of the wind and the crackle of the dying fire. We move now, he said. The watch is calling. Dolorous Ed rose slowly, his face pale beneath the frost. If it truly was the watch, he muttered. I've never known the dead to blow horns, but if they've learned how, I'll not be surprised. Then we'll find out which it is, Jon replied, strapping Longclaw to his belt. They broke camp beneath a sky that bled gray and silver. The forest lay still, its branches heavy with ice, the air so cold it bit like steel. Ghost led them through the drifts, nose low, every movement silent and sure. The direwolf's white fur was streaked with shadow, his breath rising in small, steady plumes. By mid-morning, they reached the edge of the great clearing where the land fell sharply into a valley. From there, the world seemed carved from glass and frost. Far to the south, a dark line marked the forest that ran beneath the wall. Somewhere beyond it, Castle Black waited, a single point of warmth in an endless sea of ice. Ed stood beside him, squinting against the wind. Looks close enough to walk, he said, but I wager it'll take us a lifetime to reach it. Then we'd best start living fast, Jon said with the ghost of a smile. They began their descent. The slope was steep, the snow deep and treacherous. Once Ed slipped, sliding half a dozen feet before Ghost caught his cloak in his teeth and hauled him upright again. Remind me, Ed grumbled, to thank the gods for direwolves, if we live long enough to meet them. The valley floor was a white wasteland. The trees here were dead, their branches bare and twisted, pointing like black fingers toward the sky. The ground beneath the snow was uneven, cracked with ancient frost heaves. Somewhere nearby, water moved under ice, faint and restless. They had not gone far when Ghost stopped suddenly. The direwolf's ears flattened, a low growl rumbled in his chest. Jon tensed. Something's near. From behind a cluster of frozen pines came the crunch of feet. Jon raised Longclaw, ready for another white, or worse, but what stepped into the open was no dead man. A woman stood there, cloaked in furs the color of ash. Her hair was pale as snow, her face lean, wind-chapped, and fierce. She carried a spear tipped with bone and dragon glass. "Wildling," Ed muttered under his breath. The woman raised a hand. "Hold your steel, crows. I mean no harm." Jon lowered his sword, but only slightly. "Who are you?" "Who I was doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is who's coming. You've woken something in the frost." Her voice carried the rhythm of the free folk, sharp and direct. She moved closer, studying Jon with wary eyes. "The fire under the mountain, was that you?" Jon exchanged a glance with Ed. "We sought shelter there," he said carefully. The woman's gaze hardened. "Then the old wards are broken. The dead walk the valley again. I saw them with my own eyes. A host, led by a thing in armor bright as glass." Jon felt the weight of her words settle on him. "How far?" "2 nights' march, maybe less." Ed sighed. "Of course. Always behind us, like a shadow that can't be shaken." Jon turned to the woman. "You should come with us. The wall still stands, and the Night's Watch will take in any who fight the dead." Her expression darkened. "I've no love for walls or the men who hide behind them, but the dead care little for hate, and I'd rather face them with a sword than without." She gave a curt nod. "Call me Myra, and if you're heading south, I'll walk a while beside you." They set off together through the valley. The hours dragged, marked only by the steady crunch of snow beneath their boots. Jon found himself listening to Myra's quiet strength. She spoke of the tribes scattered beyond the frost fangs, of children lost to the cold, and of fire worshippers who claimed the Lord of Light would return through one of the old bloodlines. At sunset, they reached a frozen stream. The water beneath was black and swift, running beneath a crust of thin ice. Jon crouched, breaking it with his glove to drink. The water was bitterly cold, but clean. Mara stood on the bank, watching the horizon. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. Jon straightened. "What?" "The stillness. The world is holding its breath." Ed chuckled grimly. "That's not stillness. That's dread." She shook her head. "No, dread moves. This waits." Before Jon could answer, Ghost's growl split the air. Shapes moved at the far end of the stream, dark figures half hidden by mist. 5, then 10, then more. "Whites?" Ed hissed. "No," Jon said. "Too fast." The figures broke into the open, men in furs and mail, their weapons drawn. The sigil on their cloaks was the horned skull of the Thens. "Wildlings," Mara muttered. "Not my tribe, and not friendly." The Then leader, a tall man with scars across his brow, raised his axe. "Crows," he called, "and one of our own, chained to them." His eyes fixed on Myra. "You walk with your killers, woman?" Myra raised her spear. "I walk with the living." Jon stepped forward. "We've no quarrel with you. We seek only to return to the wall." The man laughed, harsh and sharp. "The wall's dead, Crow. Haven't you heard? The cold ones took Hardhome, took the frost fangs, took every path but this. You think they'll stop for your black stones?" Ed muttered. "He's cheerful. I'll give him that." Jon held the man's gaze. "If the dead come, they'll take us all. Better we stand together." The Then sneered. "I'd sooner stand with the storm than with you." He swung his axe, and the world erupted into motion. Ghost lunged, white blur against the snow. Myra thrust her spear, catching a Then in the throat. Jon met the leader's charge, Longclaw flashing in the dying light. Steel rang against steel. The man was strong, but Jon was faster. He turned aside a heavy blow and drove his sword through the man's chest. The Then staggered, mouth open in a silent curse, and fell. The rest fled into the trees, their howls fading with the wind. When it was over, the snow was stained red. Jon stood breathing hard, the cold biting at his skin. Mara wiped her blade. "You fight well, Crow. Maybe there's more fire in you than you know." Ed groaned. "There's certainly less blood left in me than I'd like." Jon looked southward. The wind had shifted. The faint sound of the horn came again. 3 notes this time, low and grim, 3 blasts. "White Walkers," Jon whispered. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder. Even the wind seemed to pause. Mara met his gaze. "Then we run, or we die." Jon looked once more toward the far horizon, where the faint line of the wall was little more than a dream. "No," he said softly. "We don't run." He raised Longclaw, its blade gleaming in the pale light. "We stand, and we send warning to the living before the night takes us all." And as the horn's echo faded into the gathering dark, the snow began to fall again, slow, silent, and endless. The horn's cry lingered long after its final note had died, as though the very air trembled with its warning. The snow fell thicker now, whispering against the steel of Jon's armor and the rough fur of his cloak. The world beyond the valley dimmed until even the line of the trees became a blur of gray shadow and white. 3 blasts, Dolorous Ed muttered, his breath fogging before his lips. "The dead are marching. We'll not see another sunrise." Jon did not answer. He was listening to the silence that followed the horn. It was the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that waits, holding its breath before a storm. Ghost prowled beside him, low to the ground, every muscle tense. Mara moved closer, snow clinging to her braids. "If the dead are that near, we can't stay in the open. The forest will hide us." "Hide us for a while," Jon said. "But it won't stop them. The dead can smell warmth, and they never tire." "Then we keep moving until they tire of us," Ed said darkly, "which should be about never." Jon turned south. Beyond the veil of falling snow, faint shapes rose, cliffs of dark stone half buried in ice. "The Frostfang Trail runs along those ridges," he said. "If we reach them by nightfall, we'll have a chance." So they went on, 3 living souls and a dire wolf, trudging through the drifts that deepened with every step. The wind howled against their backs, carrying faint whispers that might have been words, or merely the voices of the storm. They walked until their legs felt carved from iron. The sun had vanished behind the clouds, leaving only a dull, colorless glow. The snow stung their faces like tiny blades. At last, they reached the foot of the ridges. The cliffs loomed above them, streaked with black ice and patches of frozen moss. A narrow cleft wound upward between the rocks, a half-forgotten path that vanished into shadow. Mara went first, moving with the wary grace of a hunter. "These are old paths," she said. "My people called them the ghost roads. The first men walked here when the world was young." Ed grunted. "Let's hope they left a fire behind." They climbed until the valley disappeared below them, swallowed by snow. The cleft opened at last into a small plateau, ringed by ancient standing stones. Some were toppled, others still stood upright, their surfaces carved with faint spirals half lost beneath frost. Jon ran his glove over one of them. "The same markings I saw beneath the mountain." Mara nodded. "The children of the forest left these long ago. They say the stones remember." "Remember what?" Ed asked. "What came before, and what is yet to come?" The wind dropped suddenly, leaving the world deathly still. Even Ghost stopped, ears pricking. Then, from far below, came a faint rumble. It was deep, slow, and terrible, the sound of the earth itself groaning beneath the weight of ice. Jon turned toward the valley, through the swirling snow, Faint blue lights glimmered, dozens, then hundreds, moving steadily toward them. "The dead," Myara said, her voice no more than a whisper. John's heart hammered. "We can't outrun them. We make our stand here." Ed's eyes widened. "Here? On this God's-cursed rock?" "Better here than nowhere," John said. "The stones might help us, if they truly remember." They set to work quickly. John and Ed built a ring of fire with what wood they could find: old roots, splintered branches, anything that would burn. Mara knelt beside one of the standing stones, tracing its carvings with a dragonglass knife. She murmured words in the wildling tongue, low and rhythmic, as if calling to something that slept beneath the frost. Ghost paced the edge of the plateau, growling softly. The first of the dead appeared through the storm. They moved in silence, their eyes pale as stars, their bodies stiff with ice. Behind them came more, a tide of shadows stretching into the white distance. John lifted Longclaw. The blade gleamed in the firelight. "Hold your ground," he said, "and remember, they fear flame." The whites came on. Arrows of frozen bone whistled through the air. One struck Ed's shoulder, spinning him back. He tore it free with a curse. "That's going to smart come morning," he muttered. "There won't be a morning if you bleed out," John said. The dead hit the line of fire, and the world became chaos. The flames roared, casting wild light over faces long dead. Longclaw bit deep, cleaving flesh and frost alike. Ghost leapt among them, a blur of white fury. Myra fought with her spear, every thrust precise, every strike fueled by desperate strength. For every white that fell, two more climbed over its corpse. The flames dimmed, the wood hissing and spitting. John swung until his arms burned, until his breath came ragged and his fingers numbed around the hilt. Then the air grew colder still. The flames flickered blue, shrinking low. Out of the blizzard strode a figure tall and terrible. Armor of ice gleamed upon its frame, and its eyes shone with a light not of this world. A white walker. The creature raised its sword, a blade of crystal that sang softly as it cut the air. Every living thing seemed to recoil from it. John met its gaze, heart steady. "It's you, then," he murmured. He stepped forward, Longclaw ready. The walker moved with impossible grace. Steel met ice with a scream that split the storm. Frost bloomed along Longclaw's edge, but the Valyrian steel held. John struck again, sparks bursting as the blades clashed. Myara threw her spear, but the walker turned it aside with contemptuous ease. It raised its sword to strike her down, but Ghost leapt between them, jaws clamping around its arm. The creature's cold shriek pierced the air. John seized the moment, driving Longclaw through its chest. The walker's armor shattered like glass. Its body burst into shards of frost and vanished, leaving only silence and drifting snow. The remaining whites faltered. For a heartbeat, they stood unmoving, their pale eyes dimming. Then they collapsed, one by one, lifeless once more. John stood gasping, steam rising from his shoulders. The fire burned low but steady. Around him lay the fallen, men, monsters, and shadows. Ed sat heavily on a stone, wiping blood from his brow. "If that was their master, I hope he stays dead." Myara shook her head. "There are more, always more." John looked to the horizon, where the storm had broken. A faint glow touched the sky, the first hint of dawn. "Then we go to meet them," he said, "and we warn the wall of what comes." He turned to Myara. "Will you ride with us?" She looked south, where the light grew slowly stronger. "Until the fire dies," she said. John nodded. He sheathed Longclaw, its edge still cold from the walker's touch. The three of them, Lord Commander, wildling warrior, and weary brother of the watch, stood amid the circle of ancient stones, the snow melting where the fire still burned. For one brief moment, the north was silent again, but far beyond the ridges, in lands unseen, other horns were calling, and the dead were listening. The sun rose cold and pale over the ridges, its light weak as candle flame. It spilled across the snow in long silver bands, glinting off the shards of ice and broken steel that littered the plateau. The battle was over, but the air still trembled with its memory. The smell of burnt flesh and frozen blood clung to every breath. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the rise, his black cloak stirring in the wind. The valley below lay quiet now, blanketed in white as if the world itself sought to hide what had been done. Beside him, Ghost padded through the drifts, his red eyes gleaming in the new light. Dolorous Ed leaned against one of the ancient stones, his face pale and weary. "Well," Ed muttered, his voice rough, "we're alive, which I suppose is either a blessing or the gods' idea of a cruel joke." Jon turned to him. "Count it a blessing while we can." Myra knelt by the remnants of the fire, wrapping a strip of fur around her bleeding arm. "You fight like a man who's died before," she said without looking up, and perhaps that's what the dead fear most. Jon gave a faint, humorless smile. "If they fear me, they hide it well." He gazed southward where the land rolled into fog and forest. Beyond that unseen horizon lay the wall, home, duty, and the last defense of men. Between him and that dark line of ice stretched a wasteland of snow and silence, haunted now by foes who would never rest. "We've lingered too long," he said. "The dead won't wait for us to heal." Ed groaned. "Aye, and my feet won't wait for rest, but they deserve it all the same." Still, he pushed himself upright, shouldering his pack. Mara rose as well, her expression unreadable. "The dead march south, Lord Snow. You can fight them, but you can't stop them alone. The wall must be warned." Jon nodded. "That's what we'll do." They began their descent from the plateau. The snow was soft and treacherous underfoot, sliding away in thin avalanches. Every sound seemed too loud, every shadow alive. Once, they passed the frozen remains of a giant, its skull half buried, its ribs rising like the hull of a shipwreck. The sight chilled Jon more than the wind. When they reached the valley floor, the storm had passed, leaving the air unnaturally still. The trees stood silent and bare, their branches heavy with frost. Jon led the way, Ghost scouting ahead, his white shape slipping between the trunks like a phantom. They walked for hours. The light grew dim again as clouds rolled in, blotting out the weak sun. By midday, the wind had returned, biting and relentless. It was Myra who saw the first sign of life. She stopped suddenly, lifting her spear toward the west. "Smoke," she said. Jon followed her gaze. Far off, a thin column of dark smoke rose between two ridges. "Could be brothers from the watch," he said, "or another band of free folk." "Or worse," Ed muttered. They approached warily, moving from cover to cover. The smoke led them to a narrow hollow sheltered by stone. A campfire burned there, its flame low but steady. Around it sat 3 figures in black cloaks. "Rangers," Jon said quietly. The men turned as they drew near, their faces drawn with hunger and exhaustion. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with frost in his beard, stepped forward. When he saw Jon's face, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Lord Commander Snow?" Jon clasped his arm. "Sir Gerard Slake, you live." "Aye," said the ranger. "Barely. We were part of the East Watch patrol that went missing. The storm scattered us. The rest..." He glanced toward a mound of snow at the edge of the hollow, where a black-gloved hand protruded. The rest are gone. Mara crouched by the fire, feeding it a branch. If you stay here, you'll join them soon enough. We'll not last another day without food, Slake admitted. The games fled south, and the cold. He broke off as the wind hissed through the trees. Jon understood. Then we go together, he said. We've faced worse than hunger. Ed made a dry sound that might have been laughter. You say that every time, Jon, and every time I believe you a little less. They shared what little provisions remained: dried meat, hard bread, melted snow for water. The warmth of companionship, even so meager, steadied their spirits. As dusk crept in, they set out once more. The path grew narrower, winding through ravines and patches of dead forest. The trees whispered overhead, and sometimes Jon thought he heard footsteps behind them, soft and distant. When he turned, there was nothing. They made camp that night beneath a rocky overhang. The fire cast long, dancing shadows across their faces. The men of the watch huddled close, speaking in low tones of things they'd seen in the snow, figures that moved without breath, whispers that came from the dark. Jon listened, saying little. His thoughts were far away, of Sam and Jilly, of the wall, of the fire beneath the mountain that had answered his call. Something stirred deep within him when he remembered it, something both fierce and fearful. Lord Commander, Slake said softly, what truly happened beyond the ridge? We saw lights in the night, fire brighter than day. Jon stared into the flames. There was fire, yes, old fire, something left behind by those who came before us. It saved us, for now. Ed grunted. Let's hope it's saving us still. But Mara, sitting apart from the others, shook her head. Old fire burns out, she said. It always does. What you kindled there will draw them. They hate the flame. They'll come to snuff it out. Jon met her gaze. Then let them come. We'll give them a war to remember. The wind rose again, carrying with it a sound like distant thunder. The men fell silent, listening. It was not thunder. It was the grinding march of countless feet over ice. The dead were moving again. Jon stood, his shadow long against the firelight. We move at dawn, he said. Every step we take south is a step bought with blood. But the wall must know. Ed nodded grimly. If the wall's still standing. It stands, Jon said. It has to. They slept little that night. The cold pressed against them like a living thing, creeping into every breath. Once, Jon woke to find Ghost standing at the mouth of the shelter, his fur bristling, his eyes fixed upon the dark beyond the firelight. When morning came, they rose without words. The horizon burned faint red, the color of old blood. Snowflakes drifted down, slow and endless. As they set out, Mara fell into step beside Jon. You carry their hope, she said. All of it. If the wall falls, there'll be nowhere left for any of us to run. Jon looked ahead, toward that distant line of ice unseen through the storm. Then we don't run, he said quietly. We make our stand before the night swallows the world. And together they walked into the pale dawn, where the snow swallowed their footprints, and the wind carried the promise of war. Far behind them, unseen beyond the mist and the ridges, the dead gathered in silence, their eyes burning like the stars of a frozen sky. The storm did not relent that day, nor the next. It howled like a living beast, tearing through the woods, filling the sky with whirling snow that blinded the eye and dulled the senses. Yet Jon Snow pressed onward. Each step was a test of will, each breath a victory stolen from the freezing wind. He no longer felt his fingers or the ache in his legs, only the pull of purpose guiding him south. The small company of survivors trudged behind him. Dolorous Ed stooped and muttering darkly under his breath. Myra, tireless as a wolf, her spear strapped to her back, and the 3 rangers they had found among the ruins of the forest. Behind them padded Ghost, his fur silvered with frost, his eyes twin embers in the gray world of snow. When they paused to rest, the land stretched around them like a vast white shroud. Hills and valleys rose and fell without end, the horizon lost in mist. The cold was not merely air, it was presence, heavy and watchful. Even the wind seemed to whisper things they dared not understand. At dusk, they came upon a frozen lake. The surface was dark glass, unbroken and smooth as polished stone. The rangers hesitated at its edge. "Best we go around," said Slake. "There's no telling how deep it runs." John studied the expanse. The quickest path south lay straight across. The detour would cost them a day at least. "We cross," he decided. "Keep light and move fast." Ed gave him a look that was half disbelief, half weary amusement. "Aye, Lord Commander. And when the ice breaks and swallows us, I'll be sure to tell the gods it was your clever plan." John smiled thinly. "They already know." The crossing began under the dim light of a veiled moon. The ice creaked beneath their boots, low and groaning, but it held. The reflection of the moon wavered in the black depths below, a pale coin trapped under glass. Ghost moved ahead, silent as ever, his weight leaving no mark upon the surface. Halfway across, a strange sound reached them, a distant crack, like the snapping of a great branch. John froze. The wind had died entirely. The world was still. Then came another sound, the slow, steady thump of something heavy moving beneath the ice. "7 hells," whispered Ed. The lake shuddered. A dark shadow passed beneath their feet. Huge, sinuous, ancient. The rangers backed away, their faces pale. John could see the shape now, faint through the ice, gliding beneath them like a serpent out of some elder world. "Run," John said. They ran. The ice split behind them with a sound like thunder, jagged cracks racing across its surface. Mara shouted something lost in the wind. Water exploded upward, black and freezing, and from it rose a shape out of nightmare, a creature long dead and yet alive. It had the body of a bear, skin stretched thin over bone, eyes burning blue as winter stars. A white, but no man's white. This was a beast of the Old North, woken from the deep. It clawed at the ice, dragging itself onto the lake. The air turned colder still. Slake loosed an arrow, striking the creature's chest. The shaft splintered uselessly. "Dragon glass!" John shouted. Mara hurled her spear. The tip struck true, piercing the beast's skull. For a moment it staggered, then collapsed, steam hissing from its wounds. The smell of rot and salt filled the air. "Move!" John cried. "Before the lake takes us!" They reached the far shore just as the ice gave way entirely. The frozen sheet shattered into black water, swallowing the monster and the memory of it. They collapsed upon the snow, gasping, their limbs shaking from exhaustion. Ed stared back at the ruin. "I'll say this, John. Your plans are never dull." John managed a breathless laugh. "Dull plans don't keep men alive." The laughter faded quickly. The storm had carried their scent, their sound, their struggle. In the distance, through the whirling snow, blue lights flickered once more. The dead had found them. "South," John said. "Now." They pushed on through the night. The snow fell heavier, each flake thick as ash. Myra moved ahead, leading by instinct more than sight. Once she raised her hand sharply and motioned for silence. Through the trees came faint voices, low, guttural, inhuman. The whites were close. They veered east, climbing a ridge of jagged stone. At its crest stood the remnants of an ancient wall, no more than scattered blocks, worn and half-buried, yet bearing the same spiral marks John had seen before. He brushed the snow away, tracing one with his glove. "The children made these," Mara said softly. "My grandmother told tales of such places. They called them the Paths of Fire." Ed looked skeptical. "Doesn't look much like fire to me. Looks like we're about to freeze our balls off." John ignored him. The markings seemed to pulse faintly beneath his touch, as though remembering. A faint warmth spread through his palm, impossible and real. "Light the torches," he said. "Quickly." They did, and the fire burned brighter than before, the wind seeming to draw back from it. The warmth grew, subtle but sure, like a heartbeat rising in the stones themselves. Myra stepped back, awe in her eyes. "You've woken them again." "Not I," John said. "The fire remembers." The whites appeared then, pouring over the ridge in a tide of pale faces. John raised Longclaw, its Valyrian edge glinting red in the firelight. "Hold the line," he shouted. The first wave broke upon them. The battle was swift, brutal, and endless. John's blade moved like lightning, severing limbs and shattering skulls. Ghost tore through their ranks, a white shadow of fury. Myra fought beside John, her dragonglass dagger cutting black trails through the mist. Ed fought grimly, muttering prayers between curses. "7 bloody gods! How many of them are there?" "Enough," John said through gritted teeth, "to remind us why we fight." They stood shoulder to shoulder, firelight dancing upon steel and snow. The dead pressed harder, but every white that touched the flames fell back screaming, their flesh melting like wax. The stones themselves seemed to hum, glowing faintly underfoot. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The dead withdrew, vanishing into the snow. Silence fell once more, broken only by the hiss of torches. John lowered his sword. The blade steamed faintly in the cold. "They're testing us," he said, "probing our strength before the storm breaks in full." Myra nodded. "The walkers are near. When they come, it will not be with scouts or stragglers." Ed sank down onto a fallen stone, his breath ragged. "Well, that's comforting. I was afraid things might get easy for once." John sheathed Longclaw. The glow beneath the stones had begun to fade. The warmth ebbed, leaving only the bitter chill of the north. He looked south, toward the unseen wall. "We'll rest till dawn, then we run again." The night deepened around them, vast and watchful. Ghost lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes open and alert. John stared into the dying fire and thought of the men who waited behind the wall, unaware of the doom creeping toward them. Somewhere far to the north, a horn sounded once, deep, cold, final. John did not sleep. The dawn broke like the pale eye of a dying god, wan and cold, casting its ghost light over a world that had forgotten warmth. The storm had passed in the night, but the silence it left behind was worse than thunder. Snow lay heavy on the trees, bending their black limbs beneath its weight. The fires had burned out. Only smoke rose, twisting faintly toward a sky the color of steel. Jon Snow stood alone at the edge of the ridge, watching the horizon. The wall was still nowhere to be seen, swallowed by distance and mist, yet he could feel its presence, like a faint echo in his blood, ancient and vast, calling him home. Behind him, the camp stirred. Dolorous Ed rose first, muttering darkly as he stamped his feet against the cold. Myra sat sharpening her spear beside the ashes of the fire, her face pale and hard as carved stone. The 3 surviving rangers moved quietly, speaking little, their faces gaunt from hunger and fear. Jon turned to them. We march as soon as the light strengthens. The whites will not move in full day, but the cold will not spare us either. We make for the southern valleys. Once we cross the frost water, we'll see the shadow of the wall. Ed gave a low whistle. I'll believe that when I see it. At this point, I'd settle for seeing anything that doesn't want to eat me. John's faint smile vanished as quickly as it came. He looked again to the east, where thin wisps of cloud caught the light. For a moment, they gleamed red as blood. He did not know if it was omen or warning. They began their march through the snow. Ghost led them, silent and sure-footed, nose to the wind. The world stretched endless and white, horizon melting into sky. No birds flew, no beasts stirred. Even the trees grew sparse, giving way to rolling plains of frost. They spoke little. Every breath was a labor. The cold gnawed at their bones, whispering that rest would be peace. John knew that voice well and ignored it. Near midday, they came upon a ruin. Stone walls half buried beneath snow, blackened timbers jutting from the drifts. It had once been a village, long abandoned by free folk and forgotten by time. The remains of huts lay scattered like broken teeth. Could be shelter, Myra said, scanning the ruins. Or a grave, Ed muttered. John moved ahead, sword drawn. The silence was heavy, but not empty. There was a presence here, faint but familiar, the same chill he had felt whenever the dead drew near. Ghost halted at the gate, hackles raised. Inside the ruined hall, frost rhymed the walls in strange patterns, circles and lines like runes carved by unseen hands. At the center of the floor, half buried in snow, lay a body. It was a man of the watch. His black cloak was stiff with ice, his eyes open and glassy. A horn lay by his side. John knelt beside him. One of ours. He brushed the snow from the man's chest. There was no wound, no sign of struggle. The man had simply frozen where he sat. Ed crouched beside him. Looks peaceful enough. That's the part that frightens me. Myra moved to the far side of the room. There's something else here, she said softly. John looked up. She stood before a wall where faint carvings glimmered through the frost, spirals like those on the ancient stones they had passed before. But these were different, more deliberate. At their center was a sigil John recognized from the lore of old, the mark of the Night's Watch, flanked by symbols he did not know. Beneath it, scratched into the stone, were words half lost to time. Here we stood, and fire answered. John felt the hairs rise on his neck. Another place of the first men, he said. Or their tomb, Ed added. Before they could speak further, Ghost growled low. The direwolf's red eyes burned like coals in the dim light. John rose instantly. They're coming. The air grew colder. The breath froze in their lungs. Outside, the wind began to howl, a long, slow moan that was not wind at all. The whites had found them again. Hold the doors, John commanded. The rangers shoved broken timbers against the entrance, sealing it as best they could. The first blows came moments later, dull thuds against the wood, steady and relentless. Then the sound of splintering. Ed drew his sword. I've always hated being trapped indoors, he said. Feels too much like waiting for my own funeral. John met his gaze. Then let's make it theirs. The door shattered inward. The dead poured through. Frozen faces, shattered armor, eyes burning with that terrible light. John struck the first down, Longclaw cleaving through flesh and bone. Myra's spear flashed beside him, black blood splattering the walls. The battle was close and brutal. The whites came without fear, without sound, their movements stiff but unending. The rangers fought like men already half dead, driven by pure instinct. Ghost leapt among them, his jaws tearing through icy throats. Jon's arm ached. He cut and turned, parried and struck again. But still, they came. The fire pit in the center of the hall flared suddenly, flames rising high though no one had touched it. The carvings on the wall blazed with light. Myra shouted over the roar, "The stones are waking!" Jon understood. He grabbed the fallen horn and thrust it into Ed's hands. "Blow it!" Ed stared. "Me? Now!" He raised the horn to his lips and blew. The sound filled the hall, deep, clear, and terrible. It rang through stone and sky, through blood and bone. The flames surged, turning white-hot. The whites shrieked. Fire burst from the cracks in the floor, sweeping outward in a great circle. Every dead thing it touched burned to ash. Jon shielded his face from the heat, the sound of it filling his ears like the cry of the world itself. When the light faded, silence returned. The whites were gone. Only ash remained, drifting through the air like snow. Ed lowered the horn, coughing. "Well," he croaked, "if that doesn't wake the wall, nothing will." Jon looked around. The carvings still glowed faintly, and the air was warm at last. He felt something deep within him stir, a flicker of power not his own. "The fire remembers," he murmured. Myra touched the wall, her eyes wide. "And it listens to you." Jon met her gaze. "No, it listens to the watch." He turned to the others. "Gather what you can. We move before nightfall. The walkers won't ignore that sound." Outside, the wind had stilled. The storm clouds parted, revealing a strip of clear sky where the sun hung low and red. For the first time in many days, Jon could see far to the south, and there, faint and vast upon the horizon, rose a glimmer of white and blue. The wall. A murmur passed through the men. Ed grinned wearily. About bloody time. Jon said nothing. He looked once more at the runes burning softly in the hall, and then at the horizon where the wall called them home. "Come," he said. "The long night has not yet fallen, but it will, and we must be ready when it does." They left the ruin behind, their shadows long upon the snow, and as they went, the last embers of the fire dimmed, leaving only a faint warmth in the stones, a memory waiting for the next who would call upon it. Far behind them, unseen, a pale figure watched from the tree line, frost glinting on its armor. It raised its hand, and the ashes began to stir. The wall stood upon the edge of the world, vast and terrible, a mountain of frozen blue rising to pierce the sky. From the ridge where Jon Snow and his company emerged, it shimmered like a dream half remembered, its shadow cast for leagues across the snow. Even from this distance, its presence was a weight upon the land, a wall not merely of ice, but of memory, of duty, of death and life divided. Jon felt the sight of it settle deep in his chest. He had been born beneath its shadow, bled for its oath, and died once for the sake of it. To see it now, faint and far yet still standing, stirred both hope and dread. Dolorous Ed came to his side, his hood drawn low against the wind. "There she is, Jon, cold, proud, and full of ghosts, like every woman I've ever met." Jon smiled faintly. "And like every one of them, she'll kill us if we're not careful." Behind them, the rangers of the watch and Myra of the free folk stood in silence. Their faces were hollow, their eyes sunken from cold and hunger, yet all looked upon the wall as men might gaze at salvation. "It seems so close," Myra murmured. "Yet the closer we walk to it, the heavier the air grows. Your wall is no simple thing." "No," Jon said. "It was raised with magic older than men remember. The children of the forest wove spells into its heart, and the First Lord commanders sealed them with blood." Ed gave a low sigh. "That explains why I've never liked the place." they rested little. The sun was low already, a pale disk wreathed in cloud, and the wind carried the faintest of sounds from the north. Distant cracks, like the shifting of glaciers, and a whisper beneath it that no man wished to name. "We move now," Jon said, "before night falls." The descent into the southern valley was harder than he expected. The snow was deep and soft, and what little light remained faded quickly. They wound through narrow gullies where the ice hung like glass curtains, through forests of stone that seemed carved by giants. The closer they came to the wall, the more Jon felt a strange pull, as if the ancient barrier itself were drawing him home. By dusk, they reached the frozen river called the Frostwater, its surface black and still beneath the moon. The wall loomed beyond, so vast it filled the sky, swallowing the stars. Its face shimmered faintly, veins of blue light pulsing deep within, like the slow heartbeat of some slumbering god. The men stopped, awed despite themselves. "7 hells," breathed Ed. "I'd forgotten how big it was. You could fit the Red Keep in its shadow and never find it again." Jon gazed up at it, remembering his first days in the watch, the endless climbs, the nights spent shivering atop the parapets while the wind screamed like the dead. "It hasn't changed," he said softly. "Nothing beyond the wall ever truly does." They crossed the river carefully, the ice creaking beneath their boots. The wind off the wall was sharp enough to cut skin, filled with glittering frost that shimmered like falling stars. When they reached the southern bank, Mara stopped. Her breath rose in clouds, her eyes fixed upon the towering wall of ice. "I can go no farther," she said. Jon turned to her. "You'll freeze out here. The Night's Watch will take you in." She shook her head. "The Watch guards against my kind as much as against the dead. I've seen what your brothers do to free folk who come begging mercy." "These are different times," Jon said. "The world is changing. If we don't stand together, we'll fall one by one." Myara's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "Perhaps you believe that. But your wall was built to keep us out, not welcome us in. My place is here, under the same sky that bore me." Ed stepped forward. "You fought beside us, bled beside us. Seems to me you've earned a place anywhere you please." She smiled faintly. "You're kinder than you think, Crow, but the North remembers its own ways." Jon hesitated, then drew from his belt a small shard of obsidian bound with copper wire, the last of the dragon glass he'd taken from the mountain. He pressed it into her hand. "Then take this. If the dead come again, light a fire and call my name. The flame will answer." Myara looked down at the gift, her fingers closing around it. "And if you call mine, Lord Snow, I'll answer too." They clasped hands once, briefly, and then she was gone, her figure swallowed by the snow as silently as she had first appeared. Jon watched until she vanished. "She'll not last long out here." Ed's gaze lingered on the empty horizon. "Maybe not, but she'll die free, and that's more than most men can say." They turned toward the wall. The great ice gate of Castle Black was near, but the climb to it was steep and the cold relentless. The torches they carried flickered weakly, small flames lost against the immensity of the dark. As they neared the base, a low sound reached them, the echo of a horn. Once, twice, then silence. "The Watch," Jon said. Relief flooded his chest. "They've seen us." They quickened their pace. At last the ice gate loomed before them, a yawning archway cut into the wall's heart, black as night. Light glimmered faintly within, torchlight and the shadows of men moving. But as they approached, Jon felt a sudden chill unlike any before. The air grew thick, heavy, wrong. The light within the gate flickered, dimmed, and died. Ghost growled, low and furious. Frost crept over the ground, spreading from the archway in spiderweb cracks. From the depths of the dark came a whisper, soft as breath, cold as the grave. Jon drew Longclaw. "Ed," he said quietly, "get the men behind me." A figure stepped from the shadows. It was tall, robed in black that shimmered like ice, its armor gleaming pale blue in the moonlight. Its eyes burned with that same inhuman fire Jon had seen too many times before. A White Walker. But not one of the hunters he had faced in the wastes. This one was different. Older, stronger. It spoke then, in a voice like cracking ice. The words were ancient, the tongue of the first night, but Jon understood them all the same. "Fireborn, your wall falls soon." The creature raised its hand. The frost at its feet deepened, spreading fast. Jon's heart thundered. He met its gaze, unflinching. "Then let it fall over my bones." With a cry that split the air, he charged. Longclaw met the walker's blade, steel against ice, fire against frost. Sparks flew, bright and brief against the dark. The cold struck through his armor like a knife, numbing flesh and bone alike, but still he pressed on. The creature's strength was terrible. Its sword rang like glass, each blow sending shivers through the air. Jon fought with every ounce of will he had left, every memory of oath and brotherhood driving him forward. At last he saw his chance. As the walker's blade descended, Jon twisted aside, driving Longclaw deep into its chest. The Valyrian steel flared white-hot. For a heartbeat, the creature stared at him, its face unreadable. Then it shattered, bursting into shards of ice that glittered and fell like snow. Jon collapsed to one knee, gasping. The air warmed slowly, the frost retreating. Behind him, Ed and the others stared in silence. "It's done," Jon said. "Open the gate." But even as he spoke, the wind rose again, carrying with it a sound like distant laughter. The wall groaned, a deep, living sound that rumbled through the earth. Cracks spread along its base, faint but growing. Jon looked up at that vast, cold barrier and felt his heart turn to stone. The wall still stood, but it was no longer unbroken. "The long night has begun," he whispered, and above them, unseen, the first stars of evening vanished one by one behind gathering clouds. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a deep, groaning sound that rolled through the ice and stone like the breath of some ancient beast stirring from slumber. The wall loomed above them, no longer a silent guardian, but a wounded giant. Cracks spidered across its frozen face, glowing faintly blue, pulsing as if with the beat of a dying heart. Jon Snow stared upward, the cold biting into his skin, the enormity of what he beheld threatening to break him. The wall, the one thing that had always stood, was breaking. "7 hells," Dolorous Ed whispered. "It's alive, Jon. The bloody wall's alive." "Alive," Jon said softly, "and dying." He sheathed Longclaw and turned to the men. "We move, into the gate now." The Rangers obeyed without hesitation, their fear lending them speed. Ghost bounded ahead, white against the shadow, his low growl echoing through the ice tunnel as they plunged beneath the wall. Frost fell in thin sheets from above, glittering like starlight. The air was colder inside than out, thick and heavy, humming faintly, as if the magic woven into the wall was screaming. Ed's breath came in harsh gasps. "I've never liked this bloody tunnel, and now it's groaning like it means to swallow us whole." "Keep moving," Jon shouted. "The ice is failing." They ran. The tunnel stretched on, the torchlight casting strange shapes across its walls. Faces in the frost, shadows that seemed to move when no one watched. Jon did not look back. He could feel the wall's magic fading, thinning like breath in winter. At last, a pale light appeared ahead, the southern mouth of the tunnel. They burst from it into the cold daylight beyond, falling to their knees upon the snow. They were through. They were home. The shadow of the wall fell long behind them, stretching across the frost fields like a wound. The air smelled of smoke and pine, faint and strange after so long in the haunted wilderness. "Castle Black," Ed said hoarsely, pointing. "There, see it?" Through the veil of snow, the towers of the watch rose dark and jagged against the pale sky. Smoke curled weakly from the chimneys, a promise of life amid the cold. Jon felt his chest tighten. He had left the wall as Lord Commander, and now he returned to it as something else, a ghost among the living, burdened with tidings too dire for any man. "Forward," he said. "We've come too far to die here." They trudged across the open plain, the wind at their backs, the great wall rumbling faintly behind them. When they reached the old gate of Castle Black, the guards upon the parapets shouted in disbelief. "Lord Commander Snow," cried one. "Open the gate. Gods be good. He's returned." The gates creaked open, and the familiar scent of burning wood and horse struck Jon like an old memory. Men rushed forward, their faces a mix of wonder and fear. Bowen Marsh was the first to speak. "Jon Snow," he said, voice low, uncertain. "We thought you dead. You vanished beyond the wall and sent no word. We saw fire in the sky. We thought—" "You thought right," Jon said grimly. "We found the fire, and the dead found us." He strode past them into the courtyard, snow crunching beneath his boots. "Summon every brother still breathing. Send word to Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower. The White Walkers are moving. The wall's magic is failing." A stunned silence followed. Then Marsh spoke again, softer. "The wall has stood for 8,000 years. It cannot fall." Jon turned, his gaze hard. "It is falling. I saw it with my own eyes." Whispers rippled through the gathered men. Some looked skyward, as though expecting the wall to collapse upon them at any moment. Ed gave a tired laugh. "Well, brothers, at least it waited until we were home to start dying. Thoughtful, that." Jon ignored him. He felt the weight of command settle upon his shoulders once more, heavier than any armor. He looked toward the rookery, where the black shapes of ravens shifted in their cages. "Send a raven to Winterfell," he said, "to Queen Sansa, to every lord and holdfast south of the Neck. Tell them the dead are marching. Tell them the long night is coming again." "And if they don't believe?" asked Marsh. "Then they'll die believing nothing," Jon said. He turned toward the armory, where the warmth of the forge glowed faintly. "I need dragon glass, every shard we have left, and the maester's records of the first men. Somewhere in those scrolls is knowledge we've forgotten. The wall was built with magic. Maybe it can be mended the same way." As the orders spread through the camp, Jon stepped aside, letting the others move. He felt Ghost brush against his leg, a steadying presence amid the chaos. The direwolf's red eyes watched the horizon, where the faint shimmer of the wall still rose, tall, majestic, broken. When night fell, the brothers gathered in the hall. Fires burned at the hearths, casting orange light upon the black cloaks and pale faces of the watch. Jon stood before them, his hands resting upon the table that had once been Lord Commander Mormont's. "The White Walkers have broken the frost fangs," he said. "They've raised the dead by the hundreds. Every wildling village north of the wall is gone. And now, the wall itself weakens. The cold has found its voice again." He looked from face to face, young, old, frightened, defiant. "We are the shield that guards the realms of men. That oath was never truer than it is now. The night is rising, brothers, but so will we." The hall was silent. Then one voice spoke, a young ranger near the back. "If the wall falls, what can men do?" Jon's answer was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "We do what men have always done. We fight, we bleed, and we remember that while breath still stirs in our chests, the dark has not yet won." For a moment, the firelight seemed to burn brighter. Later, when the hall had emptied and sleep claimed what few could still rest, Jon walked alone to the top of the wall. The climb felt longer than he remembered. When he reached the summit, the world stretched endless before him. North, a wasteland of white. South, the faint glimmer of torches far below. The cracks in the ice shone faintly, lines of blue that pulsed like veins. Jon laid his gloved hand against the frozen surface. It was warm. He closed his eyes. In that warmth, he felt something vast stirring, a force both alien and familiar. The wall was alive, yes, but in pain. "You've held the night for 8,000 years, he whispered. "Hold a little longer." The wind howled in answer. From the far north, faint and distant, came a sound like the echo of a horn, one long, mournful note that rolled across the ice. Jon opened his eyes. The horizon glowed faintly, not with dawn, but with fire. Orange and red flared through the darkness, and the sky itself seemed to tremble. "The war has begun," he said softly. Ghost stood beside him, fur bristling, his gaze fixed on that distant light. Jon Snow turned toward the stairs, his cloak snapping in the wind. "Then let the realms of men remember," he murmured, "that we did not hide from the night." And beneath the stars, the wall groaned once more, a sound like a warning or a promise. The next morning dawned blood red, as though the sun itself had been wounded. Its light spilled across the wall in rivers of crimson, glinting through the cracks like veins beneath skin. The brothers of the Night's Watch stood in the courtyard of Castle Black, faces pale beneath their hoods, eyes fixed on the trembling horizon. The wind had changed. It no longer came from the north, but from the east, and it carried with it the scent of ash. Jon Snow stood at the center of the yard, his black cloak snapping in the cold wind. The air around him seemed charged with something unseen, some weight pressing from above. He could feel the wall's magic waning with every breath, like the heartbeat of a dying god. Dolorous Ed approached, his beard rimed with frost. "I don't like that sky," he said. "Too much red in it. Looks like the gods have spilled their wine." Jon glanced upward. "It's not wine, it's fire." Ed followed his gaze. Beyond the wall, in the farthest reach of the sky, flames burned faintly, orange and gold flickers moving through the storm clouds like a reflection of some unseen blaze. "The wildlings?" Ed asked. Jon shook his head. "No, the dead burn nothing. That's something else. A signal, perhaps, or a battle already lost." Ed gave a low groan. "I was hoping you'd say it was sunrise." Jon turned away. "Send word to Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower. Every man is to be ready before nightfall. The walkers will not wait long now." Ed nodded, though his expression was grim. "And if they come from more than one side?" Jon's gaze hardened. "Then we die where we stand." He strode toward the armory, the black ice beneath his boots cracking faintly. Inside, the forges burned low. The smiths worked in silence, shaping dragon glass and steel, their faces streaked with soot and fear. Jon moved among them, inspecting their work. The jagged black blades, the arrowheads gleaming dull and deadly in the firelight. Every weapon mattered now. Every shard of glass could mean a life saved or lost. When he reached the far corner, he found Maester Aemon's old table covered with scrolls. Samwell Tarly had once sat there, hunched over books by candlelight, muttering about legends and lost kings. Jon ran his hand over the worn wood. "You'd have known what to do, Sam," he murmured. Ghost padded to his side, muzzle streaked with frost. The direwolf pressed against his leg, a silent reassurance in the endless dark. Outside, the horns began to sound, 1, then 2, then 3. The courtyard erupted into movement. Men poured from the barracks, bows and blades in hand, fear etched deep in their faces. Jon climbed the steps to the top of the wall. The wind hit him like a blade, fierce and cold. The sky to the north was a storm of gray and fire. Snow swirled in vast spirals, lit from beneath by flashes of pale blue light. "They're coming," said a voice beside him. Jon turned. Ed stood there, face drawn, his eyes wide with the reflection of the storm. Across the plain below, a line of figures was moving through the snow, slow, steady, endless. A host of the dead. Thousands, perhaps more. At their head moved taller shapes, gleaming faintly in the half-light. White Walkers. The horns sounded again, long and low, echoing against the ice. "Archers to the parapets," Jon shouted. "Light the pitch. Don't waste your arrows until they're close." The men scrambled into position. Fires flared to life along the wall, pools of orange light against the frozen blue. The heat was weak, but it pushed the worst of the cold away. Jon drew Longclaw, the Valyrian steel whispering as it left its scabbard. The blade caught the firelight, gleaming silver. The dead reached the base of the wall. They came without sound, climbing over one another, hands clawing into the ice. The first arrows flew, black shapes vanishing into the snowstorm. Some struck home, others shattered uselessly against frozen armor. Still, they climbed. "Oil!" Jon called. Flaming barrels tipped from the parapets, crashing below. The fire spread quickly, devouring the front ranks of the whites. The smell of burning flesh and ice filled the air. For a moment, it seemed the tide might halt. Then the wind changed. The flames flickered blue and died. The White Walkers raised their arms. The fire hissed, extinguished by cold so pure it shimmered like glass. All along the wall, torches guttered and went out. "Gods," whispered Ed. "They're killing the fire." Jon gritted his teeth. "Not all of it." He raised Longclaw high. "With me, for the watch!" The cry rose, ragged but strong. Men surged forward, loosing arrows tipped with dragonglass, driving spears into the climbing dead. The battle atop the wall became chaos. Fire and frost, steel and screams. The air crackled with magic, the wall's ancient wards straining against the assault. Jon fought without thought, his body moving by instinct alone. Longclaw sang in his hands, cutting through flesh that should not bleed. He felt nothing but the rhythm of survival, the pull and strike, the fire in his veins. A white leapt over the parapet, its eyes burning blue. Jon swung, cleaving it in half. Its pieces fell writhing to the ground. Another came, and another. For each that fell, more rose in its place. Then, from the heart of the storm, a horn sounded, a single note, clear and terrible. The White Walkers halted. The dead froze in place. From the swirling snow rode a figure on a horse black as shadow, its mane made of mist. The rider's armor gleamed like moonlight. In its hand, it carried a blade of purest ice. The Night King. Jon's breath caught. He had seen this creature once before, at Hardhome. Even across that distance, its presence chilled him to the soul. Now it stood less than 100 yards away. The Night King raised his sword. The storm itself seemed to bow before him. The wall shuddered. Cracks spread upward in bright blue lines. The air filled with a sound like thunder. Jon shouted above the roar, "Hold the line!" But the wall was breaking. Ice split and fell in great sheets. Men screamed as the parapet gave way beneath them. Jon grabbed Ed's arm. "Get them down! To the castle! What about you?" "I'll hold them here." He turned to face the Night King. Their eyes met, blue against gray. The creature's expression did not change, but Jon felt a cold satisfaction emanating from it, like the stillness before death. Jon raised Longclaw in salute. "Come then." The Night King lifted his sword, and the storm obeyed. Snow and wind swirled into a vortex, and in that blinding fury, Jon charged. He did not know if he ran toward victory or doom. He knew only that he would not flee. He would not yield the wall to death without giving it his blood first. As he leapt through the storm, the ice beneath his feet cracked like lightning, and the world dissolved into white. The sound of shattering filled the air, deep, endless, final. Then came silence. When the snow cleared, the wall still stood, but its crown was broken. The world beyond it glowed faintly blue, and the wind carried no warmth at all. The night had come. The night after the wall broke was not like any night before it. It was deeper, heavier, as though the darkness itself had weight. The wind no longer sang. It whispered. And beneath those whispers, the world shuddered. Jon Snow lay upon the frost-bitten stones of the shattered parapet, breath shallow, blood freezing upon his cheek. All around him lay ruin. Great slabs of ice split like old bone, the air filled with drifting crystals that glimmered faintly blue in the dying light. The top of the wall was gone, torn open by the force of the storm. Where it had stood proud and seamless for 8,000 years, there now yawned a jagged wound that reached down into blackness. He tried to rise, but pain lanced through his ribs. Ghost was there, pressing his great white head against Jon's arm, whining low. Jon pushed himself upright, clutching at the direwolf for balance. Below, the world burned and froze all at once. The flames of Castle Black's torches guttered blue in the wind, dying one by one. The dead were coming through the breach, thousands of them, crawling over the fallen ice like ants upon a corpse. Jon's heart sank, but he did not despair. He had seen too much, lost too much, to surrender now. "Ed!" he shouted hoarsely. "Ed!" a voice answered from the broken stair. "Still alive somehow!" Dolorous Ed appeared, half covered in soot and frost, dragging himself up from the wreckage. His face was bloodied, his eyes wild but unbroken. "The wall's falling apart around us, Jon. The lower gate's gone. They're inside the courtyard." Jon drew Longclaw, the Valyrian steel catching what little light remained. "Then that's where we go." Ed blinked. "Go? To them?" "We hold the gate," Jon said, his voice cold as the night. "Or we die trying. The wall's not fallen while one of us still draws breath." Ed groaned but grinned faintly. "Always the stubborn one." He spat blood and followed. They descended the ruined steps, stones slipping beneath their boots. Ghost bounded ahead, white fur streaked with ash. The sounds of battle grew louder as they neared the courtyard. The clash of steel, the scream of fire, the inhuman wailing of the whites. Castle Black was aflame. The old towers burned like torches, their smoke rising into the black sky. Men of the watch fought in the yard, their black cloaks whipped by the wind. Arrows hissed through the dark, but the dead did not stop. They came in waves, spilling over the walls and through the shattered gates, a tide of pale faces and empty eyes. Jon threw himself into the fray. Longclaw sang, cleaving through frozen flesh. The steel burned blue where it touched the dead. Around him, the brothers fought like wolves, back to back, each swing their last prayer. "Hold!" Jon shouted. "Hold the line!" The dead pressed harder. They climbed over the fallen, heedless of pain or fear. The fire pits hissed and guttered, the flames dying as the cold deepened. The ground itself began to frost beneath their feet, hard and white as glass. Then a new sound cut through the chaos, a low, mournful horn. Not of men. Jon turned. Through the swirling snow came figures taller than any living man. The White Walkers advanced, their armor shimmering like crystal, their swords drawn. Behind them strode the Night King himself. His eyes were twin stars of cold fire. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The wind, the screams, even the flames, all fell silent beneath his gaze. Ed swore softly. "That's him, isn't it?" Jon nodded once. "Aye." He stepped forward, raising Longclaw. The Night King's expression did not change. He raised his hand, and the fallen men of the Watch stirred where they lay. Their eyes opened, blue and merciless. The line broke. Jon's heart twisted as he saw brothers he had known all his life rise again, their faces empty. The living fled before them, stumbling through snow and flame. Jon roared and charged, cutting through the risen dead, fighting his way toward the Night King. The air grew colder with every step. Frost formed on his blade, his armor, his skin. The Night King raised his sword, and the very air screamed. When their blades met, light and shadow clashed. Sparks burst like stars. Jon felt the power of the blow through every bone in his body. Longclaw held. He struck again and again. The Night King parried each stroke with inhuman grace. Their movements were a blur, steel and ice, fury and silence. Around them, the world fell apart. Jon faltered. The cold crept into his lungs, stealing his breath. The Night King pressed his advantage, striking with impossible strength. Jon's knees buckled. The icy blade slashed across his shoulder, and pain burst like fire. He fell to one knee. Ghost lunged, tearing at the Night King's leg, but the creature struck the direwolf aside with a single blow. Ghost tumbled across the snow, yelping. "No!" Jon's voice was raw, filled with rage and grief. He rose, swinging with all his strength. Longclaw's edge met the Night King's sword, and this time the steel did not shatter. It blazed white. The Night King stepped back. For the first time, Jon saw surprise in those icy eyes. He pressed forward, driving Longclaw into the creature's chest. The blade sank deep, glowing like a shard of the sun. The Night King screamed, a sound that tore the sky apart. Frost burst from his body, shards of ice flying in every direction. Then he shattered, exploding into a storm of snow and light. The shockwave hurled Jon backward. He struck the ground hard, his vision swimming. When he rose, the whites were collapsing around him, falling like puppets with their strings cut. The cold lifted, replaced by the dull heat of dying fires. Ed limped toward him, half burned and bleeding. Did you kill him?" Jon looked at the place where the Night King had stood. Only ashes remained, glowing faintly blue before fading into nothing. "No," Jon said quietly. "Not killed. Banished, maybe. For now." They stood in the wreckage, breathless, surrounded by silence. The wall still loomed, cracked in bleeding frost, but it stood. The dead lay unmoving. Jon sank to his knees. He looked toward the north, where the storm clouds were breaking apart, revealing a pale dawn. "The wall held," Ed said weakly. Jon shook his head. "The wall remembers, but the war's not done. The others will rise again. The dead do not rest long." He looked toward Ghost, who limped to his side, muzzle streaked with blood but alive. Jon placed a hand upon his head. "We're still here," he whispered. As the first light of day touched the shattered wall, Jon Snow rose to his feet, Longclaw in hand. The world was changed. The wall was broken, but not fallen. The dead defeated, but not destroyed. Behind him, Castle Black burned. Before him stretched the long white road south, to Winterfell, to war, to whatever hope remained. He turned his face to the dawn. "The night is long," he said, voice steady, "but I am not done with it yet." And with Ghost at his side and the last survivors of the Watch behind him, Jon Snow walked down from the ruins of the wall into the light that awaited and the shadows that followed.